Welcome to the PPP Weekly Press Conference. With me this morning here is Central Committee member, Mr. Dan Kumar Siraj, and our General Secretary as usual, Mr. Clement Rohi. First, we'll have a statement which will be read by Mr. Siraj, and then we'll have two statements by the GS, and then we'll open the floor for questioning. Siraj.
Thank you, General Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I'm very happy to be here this morning. The statement I'm about to read has to do with Transparency International and its Guyana report. The People's Progressive Party, PPP, has noted with interest the latest report by Transparency International on Guyana, which ranked Guyana low on its Corruption Perception Index. The PPP, while respecting the organization's right to obtain information from whatever sources it deemed necessary, nevertheless feels compelled to draw attention to the body's reliance on information from organizations and individuals which has known hostility to the ruling People's Progressive Party civic administration and with obvious links to opposition parties. Under such circumstances, it is not illogical to assume that subjective and partisan influences can be brought to bear into the information and data gathering processes, which in turn could introduce biases into the report. Having regard to the above, the PPP wishes to respectfully suggest to Transparency International that it should review its information sources on Guyana. In the interest of transparency, it may also wish to inform the Guyanese people of the methodology used to obtain information, its sampling techniques, and the universe of persons and organizations contacted to provide information and data. It is the considered view of the party that adequate consideration was not taken by those responsible for providing data information and information on Guyana of the several initiatives taken by the current administration at both the legislative and administrative levels to enhance accountability and transparency in Guyana. Among these are the establishment of the Integrity Commission, the linking of the Auditor's General report from the Ministry of Finance and the Freedom of Information Act. The PPP wishes to state that it has serious difficulty to accept the ranking given to the country in view of the manifested biases and prejudices of officials comprising the local chapter of Transparency International. The credibility and integrity of the report on Guyana will continue to be held suspected by a wide cross-section of the Guyanese people unless Transparency International put in place new and transparent modalities in the way they conduct their business in Guyana. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll have the GS.
Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen of the media. I will deal with the first press statement, which reads as follows. The Central Committee of the People's Progressive Party met on Saturday, December 7th at the Albion Training Center, East Berbice, Quarantine. The meeting commenced with a minute's silence in honor of the passing of world icon, former South African President Nelson Mandela. The discussions at the Central Committee meeting centered around two presentations. The General Secretary's report delivered by Mr. Clement Rohi and a report by Dr. Roger Luncheon on the local economy and international situation. The Central Committee examined the implementation of various aspects of its political strategy and concluded it was sufficiently in a state of readiness for either local government and national and regional elections. Full-scale discussions on the continuous efforts of the PPP to reconnect and strengthen its links with the working people also featured prominently. With the leadership of the party giving firm recommitment to intensify and enhance the work of party groups and structures as one of the priorities over the next months ahead. The party will give greater attention and supervision to the Progressive Youth Organization and the Women's Progressive Organization to boost their capacity as it prepares itself for any political eventuality over the next months. In keeping with the program of the PPP, which calls for the establishment of a national democratic state that represents the interests of all classes, groups, and social strata as part of an inclusive state, a decision was taken to work towards the creation of a broad, left, progressive, democratic, and nationalist front, comprising of representatives of all sections of the working people, farmers, intellectuals, professionals, the business community, NGOs, and all Guyanese who share a common vision of the national democratic choice. The Central Committee condemned the unsubstantiated attacks against the party and government by the combined opposition, aided and abetted by a hostile opposition media. The PPP leadership expressed disgust over what appears to be a sinister plot of the media in concert with sections of the media, in concert with the opposition political parties, PNC, APNU, and AFC, to destabilize Guyana's economy by attacking and undermining foreign investments, the local private sector, and public sector investment projects in general. It was the resolve of the party leadership to adopt a more aggressive strategy to continually expose and dismantle the obstructionist agenda of the opposition media. The party's machinery will support an intensified approach to protect the national interests, safeguard our democracy and gains from the incessant opposition media assault. The Central Committee pledged that the opposition and its media will not go unchallenged at any point. The sanitation and the environmental health situation generated much discussion, with the meeting exploring ways and means of finding solutions to the garbage disposal problems, which has resulted in much concern by residents. The Central Committee heard reports from party regions in Berbice and discussed extensively ways and means to strengthen party structures in the region. With respect to the international situation, the meeting analyzed and took note of the continuing failure of the neoliberal models of development to deliver to the needs of the working people and the resultant global economic and financial crisis which has gripped the capitalist world, more particularly in the Eurozone economies. It is the working people who are forced to carry the full burden of the crisis through high unemployment levels, wages freeze, cuts in social services, and an overall decline in the standard of living of the working class. The party reaffirmed its commitment to and support for the working people the world over in their struggle for a just world order and for their social and economic advancement. The Central Committee also expressed satisfaction over the enormous strides made by the PPPC government under the leadership of President Donald Ramatar and reaffirmed the party's unswerving support to the President and his administration in its ongoing effort to enhance the quality of life of the Guyanese people. The meeting ended on a high note of optimism and a resolve to intensify efforts to strengthen the party both organizationally and structurally. A fan out into several communities by Central Committee members, reinforce the support of residents of East Berbice Quarantine for the party, and the interactions provided party leaders with first-hand information on issues of concern. That was the first statement, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like now to deal with the second statement, which reads as follows. The deplorable state of affairs in the capital continues to be of great concern to the People's Progressive Party. Under the leadership of Mayor Hamilton Green, the council seems incapable of dealing with the evident gross mismanagement, lack of accountability, corruption, and the inability of providing even the most basic services to the citizens of Georgetown. This PNC-style administration has been going on for too long and has reached a stage where the only rational solution is for the council to resign. The PPP fully supports the establishment of an interim management committee to manage the affairs of the capital city. The party is confident that an IMC comprised of committed, non-partisan persons, as was the case some years ago, is the only solution to the current problems. Such an IMC will get the full support of the population of Georgetown. The PPP and the PPC government will certainly support an IMC to clean up this monumental mess. Rather than grappling with this situation, especially the pileup of garbage throughout the city for years, Mayor Green and his supporters in the council are more interested, it seems, in dabbling in petty politics and constant personal attacks on town clerks and other city officials. The mayor and the PNC GGG councillors have never been satisfied with past town clerks. And this is the case once again. Since Ms. Carol Subers began acting as town clerk, the infighting started. Now that she has been confirmed as town clerk, after acting for almost 2 years, by the Minister of Local Government, the attacks have intensified. The council would like the citizens of Georgetown and Guyana to believe that the town clerk is the problem. On the contrary, the problem lies with the council and its lack of leadership and being out of touch with the problems in the city. It is now time to move off from the town clerk and move on to city council challenges and have them addressed. The most distressing aspect is the absence of a plan on the part of the council on how to deal with the situation. The city of Georgetown is growing rapidly in many ways, but haphazardly. The council doesn't have a plan to manage the waste generated, clogged drains and canals, deteriorating roads, collection of rates and taxes, building and health inspections, uncontrolled vending, traffic congestion, etc. Flooding in the city is getting unbearable, resulting in great losses to citizens and businesses. It has reached a point where the health, safety, and property of citizens are in great danger. The central government has been making strenuous efforts to assist. It has been assisting in maintaining roads, bath pumps, cleaning of canals, and disposal of garbage, etc. But this is being done outside of any plan, and these efforts have had little effect. The government has been at pains to point out that the council needs to put its act together and involve all stakeholders to deal with this myriad of problems. However, they seem incapable of doing so. And so it has now come to the position that the only solution for the council to resign. Let us have an IMC that can lead a national effort to build a modern city and satisfy the growing needs of the population. I thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Now we'll open for questioning in normal protocol. Chad? Then Adam.
Yes, can you say what are some of the indicators that points to the PPP's readiness for general and local government elections?
What are the indicators of its readiness?
Yes.
I don't want to say too much on this, but let me speak in general terms. The party from an organizational perspective, first and foremost, has always been ready. This is not an electoral party, an electioneering party. So we don't spring into life only when elections are in the air. The PPP is always on the ground. The PPP has the reputation of being the best organized political party in Guyana. We intend to keep that reputation intact. Now, where there have been instances where that reputation have been damaged, resulting in us losing the majority in Parliament, one of the elements of ensuring our state of readiness is to ensure that what we lost is regained. Once we are clear, and once we have definitive conclusions that these two factors are unquestionable, I think that is a very important indicator, one of the several indicators in respect of our state of readiness. Secondly, the party machinery. The People's Progressive Party has had once again the reputation of having machinery that is usually well oiled. We intend once again to keep that reputation intact. But this cannot only be done by words. This requires hard work. The machinery comprises of the basic organization of the party, which is the groups and the structures. The district committees, the regional committees, all of which are elected bodies, with persons who are fully on the ground as well. Meetings of all these bodies. You see, it's important for you to understand the machinery, because it is the membership, the supporters, and the sympathizers who keep this machinery greased. And I'm not talking about grease part 1 or part 2. Keeping this body greased by actively participating in the activities, keeping the leaders on their feet, keeping the NDCs, the RDCs, the members of parliament, the ministers on their feet, so that whenever we go on walkabouts, whenever we go on outreach meetings, this machinery kicks into place to ensure that all these things come together.
Quick follow-up. How confident are you at the next general elections that you will be able to regain the majority in Parliament?
I am as confident can be. I am not overestimating or underestimating the level of confidence which our supporters are beginning to demonstrate once again. But like I've said time and time again, confidence is built up on the basis of hard work on the ground. And this is what we've been doing. Sustained hard work, painstaking work on the ground. Politicians always have to be on the ground. And we have learned that lesson very hardly, and we continue to do so. So this confidence is not built up mainly on the basis of words. the confidence that we have is engendered, is generated mainly on the basis of how we sense our supporters and members, particularly reacting to the programs and the policies of the party.
All right, Adam.
Yes, sir. Sir, back to City Council.
Yeah.
About 3 years ago or so, Keith Rose spearheaded a committee that investigated all the shortcomings and put up a report with which the Conclerk and the city treasurer were to work. It was a very comprehensive report. I don't know whether you were aware, but I would like to know if this report is still in place, because it seems to me that if you work with the report, all the kind of nonsense we're hearing about City Hall not being able to do this and not being able to do that should not have existed.
But are you sure that the City Council as presently constituted under the current leadership adopted the report?
Yes, sir. Keith Burroughs was there. As a matter of fact, he don't want to talk much. But he instituted it. They brought in software, computer software, to assist with rate and tax collection. Everything this was done last year. And it was in place.
So the question is, why therefore
Is it
is the
not
City
yet
Council
done?
still failing?
Yeah. If they're using the report or they're using it, I don't know.
Well, you know, I've always maintained that the human factor is always the most critical factor. So you can have the best plan, but if you don't have the people to work the plan, if you don't have the qualified people, you don't have the committed and the dedicated people to work the plan, then we have problems. And that may very well be where the answer lies.
Yes.
And Mr. Kumar, serious, the Transparency International thing. About a year ago, I spoke with the British High Commissioner, and he said no government would want to be happy to accept negative reports. So one of the things they should is use those reports as guidelines to see if they could improve themselves, rather than knocking the report and contending inadequate concession not being taken and debunking a whole lot of things. As the party ever decided, party or government decided, let's see if this report identifies genuine shortcomings and if we can improve on them.
The British High Commissioner can speak for the British government. We can speak for our government. And the People's Progressive Party, it built on solid principles, one of which has to do with criticism. Criticism from objective criticism from outside, criticism from inside. And we always promote among our ranks, this thing about self-criticism too. So it is not only now, but the PPP civic government has always welcomed constructive criticism. And they deal with constructive criticism in that way, to take from it, see whether there are merits in it, and to deal with those issues. No government is perfect, no party is perfect, but we expect that in addressing areas in which we are not so good, areas that imperfection exists, that criticism will help us to address those issues. So we have a very open mind in dealing with criticism. What we have a difficulty with is when, like what is happening, like I mentioned in my statement, where you cannot expect a transparent report to be credible if it is taken from sources known to be hostile to you. It loses its credibility. And that is what we're saying. We're not saying that, there are not problems with the government, or there are not issues of, some corruption here and corruption here. But in demanding credibility, you yourself have to be credible. And you have to also look and make your comments against the background from where Guyana came from. October 5th, 1992, the PPP got into government on a platform of accountability and transparency. And we must make reference to that. Where is it that the country was and where it is today? and to give us, some kudos too. It's not that this government has been, or sitting on its laurel when it has to do with accountability and transparency. As I've mentioned in my statement, there have been legislative changes, there have been administrative changes, and this country is much better off today than it was 20 years ago. And that is not mentioned anywhere at all in the report. It just seems bent on beating the government on its head to bring it down to its knees, and that is what we have a difficulty with, not criticism or objective criticism.
Just here, a couple of questions.
Sure.
First of all, you question the credibility of, Cherry Devlin, Starbuck News, my apologies. You question the credibility of the source which information was taken from. Just for clarification, the source which you're referring to is Transparency Institute of Guyana, yes?
Yeah.
Now, at the release of the results or the release of Guyana's standing, how Guyana did, it was mentioned that Transparency Institute Guyana had no part to play in the compilation of the report. 4 international organizations, independent organizations, were the ones who sent representatives to Guyana, conducted their surveys, and then sent the information back. At no part, and this is on their website, the methodology used, etc., etc. But the point is, Transparency International had no part to play in the actual compilation of the report, and therefore had no part to play in Guyana's grading. Now, since institutions, organizations such as the World Bank were the ones who compiled this information, and you're saying you're questioning the credibility of the source of the information, does it therefore mean that you're questioning the credibility of the World Bank and these other international organizations who actually did the work in terms of determining whether or not there's corruption in Guyana? That's just my first question. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm questioning Transparency International report. Secondly, I'm not aware, and I've had wide experience.
Sorry for cutting you. It's not Transparency Institute Guyana's report. It's Transparency International's report. And Transparency Institute Guyana being the local chapter, as a matter of fact, the report was out before they even had the press conference saying this is what Guyana did. It was on Transparency International's website.
Yeah, but I was getting to that in the sense that I have had years of experience, over 2 decades of experiences in dealing with international organizations. In my substantial job, back in the past, I did a lot of work in dealing with international organizations. And there, in my experience, no international organization will send a mission into any jurisdiction without any local arrangement in place. There must be some level of collaboration, there must be some level of organization, there must be some mechanism in place to deal with whatever is the purpose of their mission.
Are you aware of any such
Right?
arrangements, sir?
So if you're saying that in this report that you have had these agencies sending mission separate, those missions would not have been working in isolation of the local chapter. As a matter of fact, those missions would have used the local chapter as the focal point from which to go out and do their work. They won't come here, they'll be lost in the wilderness. They would have had, that is why we have a local chapter. And that local chapter would have been involved in organizing their mission here to satisfy their purpose and their objective. And they would be, our position is that they would have been pointed in direction. And that is what we're questioning, is that the base of the information gathering is not as widespread and is not random. It would have been selective, given the result, not only the result, given the persons and the information base that we know of. So there's no isolating the mission that came in here from the local chapter of Transparency International. And we maintain that position, that the local chapter would have been the focal point from which they would have been moving them out and organizing their data gathering and doing their interviews.
Okay, next. Any other?
Well, let me say something on this. The way how these things operate according to international relations, every international organization or institution has a local focal point. In the United Nations system, the local focal point is usually the government. in the branches of the United Nations, whether it's UNICEF, UNDP, or whatever, they all have local focal points. Amnesty International has a local focal point. Transparency International must have a local focal point. So I agree with my colleague, there's no way in building a Chinese wall between Transparency International and whoever their local focal point might be. No. Transparency International, like any other international organization, could very well sell their representative down here to do a field trip. You know, look at what things they're doing and make their assessments. But let's face it, if either you or me were to pick up ourselves today and travel to Trinidad and Tobago, or even just next door to Suriname, am I to understand that within a matter of a week, we will transform ourselves into experts of the situation in Trinidad and Tobago or Suriname, so we could pronounce authoritatively on one matter or the other? It doesn't happen like that. You have to have sources, the media, local representatives, the diplomatic missions, the political parties. You have to speak to people. And even when you speak to people, you get prejudicial views because everybody comes with their own prejudices. When the State Department publishes the annual report on human rights or on trafficking in persons, where do they get the information from? The U.S. Embassy is their focal point for the State Department. They send up their report to the State Department, and as per norm, because they have their local people on the ground, their principals in Washington, Vienna, or wherever, are likely to take into consideration what their people on the ground are saying. In the same way, Guyana has an embassy, let's say, in United Kingdom. If something is to happen in the UK, the Foreign Ministry receives a report from its embassy in the UK. And it takes guidance from the embassy or the High Commission in the UK, and then advises the government on what they should do for what they shouldn't do. And incidentally, I notice you are trying to say that even if Transparency International takes something from the World Bank, that we should be cautious about that. My friend, you know, there are no holy cows in this world of global politics. There are no holy cows. So if we have, I'm not saying in this case, but if we have to make a criticism, whether it's of the IDB, the World Bank, the IMF, or whatever the case may be, once it is in our national interest to do so. I don't know if you know the saying in diplomacy, we do have permanent friends, we have permanent interests. As a young journalist, you need to know this. We do not have, just a minute, we do not have permanent friends. Just be a little respectful, please. Be a little respectful. We do not have permanent friends, we have permanent interests. And in any state, once a country's permanent interests are threatened, they will respond.
Good.
Thank you very much. I just have one more question.
A follow-up to that?
Yeah, the point I was trying to make is that Mr. Siraj's statement, he was saying that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the major issue with the report was the fact that International Transparency Institute of Guyana, which is seen by the party as not being the most credible institution or organization, had a part to play. No. So the question that I asked is, if you remove this party's role from the preparation report, if if your uncertainty about the report will still stand. You also raised questions about the methodology used. I don't know if you had a chance to check it out, but on Transparency International's website, they also explain this. what I also wanted to ask Mr. Siraj is in relation to the perception, because this is what they're really measuring, the perception of corruption in Guyana, not actual levels of corruption, since it's almost impossible to measure this. Does the party believe, or from the party's position, do you believe that there's an increase or a decrease in the perception of corruption based on what the party has been observing in society over the last year?
Well, there definitely has been an increase in the perception, given what you're reading in the press on a daily basis.
Exactly.
And
That's
that
the
is what is
problem.
important.
That's
It
the
would appear
problem.
now that the issue of corruption has taken a back burner now. And when you start to hype up this matter, right? And you're right, and I'm glad you made the point, is that the perception is what was measured. But in politics, the reality doesn't always matter, because what people perceive to be the reality is what will influence them when they go to give their support at whatever point in time. So perception is very, very important in this game of politics. And we think that it's a deliberate ploy to increase the level of perception of corruption, because these are all veterans of the game. They know that perception can influence thinking, and people in their day-to-day life often don't have the time to go into and investigate a matter. They read something in the papers about big stealing, take the ministry for example, big headlines, billions stolen or misappropriated or whatever, right? And that perception is created that there is stealing there. The next day there is a small line apologizing for this misinformation. Nobody reads a small little thing in the corner there. The perception has already been created that in the Ministry of Education, $1.2 billion has been misappropriated, right? The next day you see the little apology and that's it. But to answer your question, we think that there is a deliberate effort out there to increase perception of corruption in the country. Because we're not getting the facts coming out, and we're not getting people to come and give hard evidence as to say, where is the corruption? Can we go and prosecute? Let's get the report in and so on and so forth.
But listen, just do the calculation. Do the calculation. 7 days a week, 2 newspapers, Kaicho News and Starbuck News, keeps hammering away at a thieving government, a corrupt government, 7 days a week. The Kaicho News boasts about their circulation. The Starbuck News also boasts about their circulation. Right? Calculate 7 days a week, and based on the circulation of these 2 newspapers, how many people are receiving a copy of those newspapers on a daily basis, or if not on a daily basis, every 2 days, okay? And assume that they're reading it, because when you're doing economics, you need to do assumptions that these people are reading these newspapers. In addition to that, in the evenings, the electronic media kicks in with the same flavor of the day, pounding and pounding and pounding these things in the heads of people. My friend, just do the economics and you will conclude that when a people and a nation are being bombarded so incessantly with a propaganda which says that is focused, and we're not stupid, we've been around for years, a propaganda that is focused, that is, tunnel vision, so to speak. They're not dancing all over the place, They're focusing on this issue all the time. anyone who's acquainted with how information works, and you don't have to be a journalist to know this. Anyone who is acquainted with how information, or for want of a better word, how propaganda works, there's something that's called that you feed the perception. There's something that has to feed the perception. You yourself ask the question, take away the local cohorts of Transparency International from Transparency International report. What kind of report would you expect? Let me put the situation on the converse. Take away the media from the daily pounding which the people get in this country about how corrupt this administration is, and tell me what will be the result. So you have to feed the perception. You have to, and you cannot underestimate that. The perception is being fed 24/7, hundreds upon hundreds of papers getting out there. And signals, TV signals getting out there, bombarding the people on this thing. If you to go to Starbucks Market, you ask the water coconut man, what do you think about this government? I wouldn't be surprised if you say there's a thieving government or corrupt government. Because when you look at the side of his card, he got a Kaichou News newspaper. And he's being fed a daily diet of the flavor of the day. So if you want to be objective and scientific in your assessment of this situation, that is what you have to do. They have a mission they've set out on. Kaichou News has a mission that they've set out on. Sabo News has a mission that they've set out on. The editorial has set the policy.
Yes. This is your final question.
To final point on the question, you speak of objectivity and the need of objectivity to create the right perception. But at the same time, if we
No. I never use the word right perception because the question would be,
you said, okay, you spoke.
no, I use objectivity. But I didn't use right perception.
In relation to the opposition.
Hold a second. Because the question will be who decides what is right and wrong. And I'm not going down that road.
Okay, fine. You spoke of the right need for objectivity. But
Yeah.
if you remove this so-called opposition media, the only thing that's left are state agencies. And if we peruse the state agency newspapers and the media, you will find, the only thing you will find is information praising the government. So that also says something about perception. But moving on, my final question.
No, I don't understand what the point you're making.
Okay, you're saying that
I'm making a comparative analysis.
And I'm comparing as well. You're saying that Kaichou News and Starbucks News creates a certain perception. What I'm saying is that Guyana Times and Chronicle creates a certain perception.
No, sir, no, you can't look at it that way.
At any rate.
You can't look at it that way.
My final question. And either yourself or Mrs. Siraj can address this particular question. Still on the matter of perception of corruption. The absence of the Public Procurement Commission, the absence of the Integrity Commission, the absence of the Ombudsman's Office, these institutions are bodies which are supposed to combat corruption. With the absence of these organizations or institutions, is it not safe to assume, or is it not understandable why there would be a perception that things that are not supposed to happen are happening because the bodies which are supposed to prevent them do not exist?
The logical extension of your argument. How old are you?
Old enough.
No.
Old enough.
Thank you, brother.
Okay, the logical extension of your argument is that by not setting up these bodies, the government is indeed perpetuating the perception of corruption and is itself corrupt and is covering up corruption. Am I correct?
That could be an assumption.
That could be. That is the logical extension of your argument. So, but you have to be able to defend, very effectively, and again I use the word scientifically, what is the basis for your conclusion that by not setting up these institutions, corruption will either be there or not there? To make a bland statement to the effect that you made just now, that by not setting up these things, you are perpetuating the perception of corruption. That is somebody else's role. That is somebody else's role to determine whether by not setting up these things you are indeed perpetrating corruption. But the real question is that indeed so? And who makes that decision that by not setting up or by setting up, you're addressing the question of corruption?
If I want you to just a little piece, now, friend Marcel and Minister Rubin to some extent, that there is a perception of corruption. And then Dan put it a bit forward when he said, there are incidences of corruption. Why has there been the inability to prosecute anybody, which I think is the main reason for the perception? No prosecution. So, and the AG report provides evidence. So there is a belief that the government is supporting that corruption.
No, I don't agree with that. There is a mechanism in the Parliament to deal with the Attorney General's reports. There is what is it called?
Yeah, the General's report.
The Auditor General's reports. There is this institution they call the Public Accounts Committee. The Accountant General report goes to the Public Accounts Committee, which is bipartisan, and they go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And the media, I understand, gets information that comes out of those meetings, and they publicize it, right? Now, the police can't pick up itself. The fraud squad or whatever body it is, just can't pick up itself outside of those discussions that are taking place at the Public Accounts Committee, and say they're going after this person or going after that body because the Public Accounts, the Auditor General report says X, Y, or Z. They can't do that. Due process has to follow. The Public Accounts Committee must go through the Auditor General's report as best as they could. And then, if it is desirous of calling for an audit to be done or something, then that is the body that has to do that. Now, we have to be careful that Guyana is a very small country, and people usually are very sensitive. The moment you begin going after a person because of a perception, that person might eventually end up taking you to court. I mean, not every big building going up is associated with some corrupt activity. Not every house going up is associated with some corrupt activity. Maybe, but who knows? Who can define the maybe? So we got to be careful that we don't. You see, I am beginning to conclude, Adam, that we may very well be transforming ourselves in a very vengeful society. Everybody's looking out for some vengeance. And, there's this famous book that was written by Frantz Fanon, when he spoke about the people turning on themselves when there was no one to turn on. The rest of the earth.
Yes.
We got to be a little careful that, we don't go running after people just because somebody said he's a thief.
All right, any? Yes, Chad, last
We got to
question.
learn from South Africa and Mandela,
Last
See
question.
what's happening in South Africa.
With your permission, I would like to venture off of today's consent of today's forum. Question to the General Secretary. The government has been placing significant emphasis on the tourism sector. In light of this, can we see the appointment of the tourism minister, or will Ms. Lally continue to act in that capacity?
My silence on the matter, I think, is an indication that the party hasn't given any serious attention to this matter within recent time. The PPP, as a political party, we haven't given any serious attention to this matter within recent times.
Thanks. Yes,
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, because